Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Using Tabletop Role-Playing Games to Teach from Pre-K to Adult Learning with Steph C., owner and writer for TTRPGkids.com and co-founder of Tattered Bear. My name is George Bergstrom, and I am the Southwest Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the question moderator for today. Today's webinar is co-sponsored by the American Library Association's Games and Gaming Roundtable. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. This session is 1 hour, so you'll receive 1 LEU for today. If you are watching the archived recording of the webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEU are available in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can find the instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under LEU policies. I'll now turn the presentation over to Steph.
Hello. So, as George said, this is about using tabletop RPGs to teach from pre-K to adult learning. I'm Steph. I run the TTRPGkids website, which is currently up for any best online content. This website is a resource for parents, families, teachers, librarians, creators, everyone in between who's interested in making or using youth-accessible tabletop role-playing games. I'm also a co-founder of Tattered Bear independent publishing company. This company focuses on all ages tabletop RPGs and helping indie creators get their projects out there. I am an engineer. I worked in automotive for a while doing crash testing. I had a little bit of time at NASA. It's been a bit of a windy career path. And I'm currently an engineering professor at Lawrence Technological University, teaching a freshman intro to engineering class, which we'll get into a little bit in this presentation. As I'm going through the presentation, I'm dropping a link into the chat. This link has all the resources that I'm talking about here with additional information. So if you want to follow along or kind of bookmark for later, you can. First off, I want to talk about what a TTRPG is. So if you want to drop in the chat, if you're new to tabletop RPGs, let me know and I'll kind of adjust the presentation a little bit to cover that a little more. So a TTRPG is a tabletop role-playing game. The most common or most well-known tabletop RPG is Dungeons and Dragons, but tabletop RPGs are a lot more than just Dungeons and Dragons. It's any game that uses a physical or virtual table, so not a video game like Minecraft. It is role-playing, so you're playing as a character and putting yourself through that perspective. And there's some kind of randomization, which is the game element. So there's going to be some strategy, some decisions, dice, cards, something to that effect. A couple examples are Color My Quest, which is a coloring book-based tabletop RPG for young children, where you play as a character and one of the main mechanics involves kind of coloring things in and folding paper and cutting. Another one is Inspiriles, and this one is also made to be youth accessible, and it teaches sign language as part of the spellcasting mechanic. This presentation is about what tabletop RPGs teach. The list is exhaustive. There's a huge list of benefits from playing tabletop RPGs, from practicing problem-solving skills to increasing engagement with the curriculum by making it fun, math, literacy, picking up collaborative skills, and so on. You can incorporate a lot of other educational touch points. So like I mentioned, Inspiriles teaches sign language as you play. There's also games that are specific to teaching math. So it's not just the math of rolling a die and adding a modifier. This one right here, Arithmagine, practices multiplication and can be adjusted to teach exponents. And then this one down in the bottom corner is a screenshot of a game called Whither and Whence that I've played with my kid. And it's for helping children practice using non-standard units of measurement, which is one of the core skills for foundational math abilities. I want to start out with looking at the pre-K side of introducing tabletop RPGs. So this talk is from pre-K to adult education. We're going to start with pre-K. So the curriculum that we're talking about was made for a teacher librarian friend. And their goal was to support the social emotional learning curriculum at the pre-K that they were teaching at. In addition to the social emotional learning skills that were incorporated into the tabletop RPG, I also added motor skills practice, early learning activities, and projects and tips that could be used to fill out the rest of the class and engage the students in the narrative. So using the social emotional learning curriculum in the tabletop RPG, the way that we did it to make it accessible to the whole class at the same time is everybody in the class plays as the same character. So you have one character for the whole class, and they're going to be making descriptions and decisions within the story together. Each story that we give them to play is going to focus on a different social emotional learning topic. So this was a 30-week curriculum. So each story takes a different point and dives deep into it. This one right here, it's an example from Sandy the Dragon. So Sandy's one of the popular characters that we've used within the game. Sandy is a young dragon who has wings but hasn't quite learned how to fly yet. So the class follows Sandy's journey, going through this woods and swamp, trying to get up to a mountain to visit their friend. They're facing challenge after challenge and succeeding and building that kind of foundation for seeing that you can practice things and succeed. You can try out different options. And by the time Sandy gets up to the mountain, Sandy looks up and the path isn't clear. They try climbing and the rocks kind of fall down. It's not super stable. They try shouting up to their friend and he can't hear them. So Sandy needs to fly to get up there. So we have kids practice either positive self-talk, which is the first option, or practicing something before trying it, kind of like doing a bit of a pretend play scenario for it before actually doing the thing. Kids get to choose which option they want. They discuss it as a class first to all come to agreement. So they're talking about different social emotional learning techniques when they're in a calm state. So not when a child is escalated and you're trying to say, take a deep breath. They're looking at these techniques and options and taking that in and experiencing it with their classmates, and then making a decision for the character and seeing it have a positive impact. So this really locks in these learning topics by giving them a positive interaction with it, group understanding, and then also multiple touch points throughout the story. So that way they're experiencing it at different times and seeing repeated positive impacts. We also incorporated motor skills practice, both gross and fine motor skills. So this particular story involved it was a Halloween special with Sandy the Dragon. So we had a guided movement for a dance. The teacher would put on some spooky music in the background, and then kids would follow the dance. And then there was also a fine motor skill activity where kids cut out the costume pieces, colored them in, and then put them onto a paper doll version of Sandy the Dragon. This has a engagement opportunity with the story. So you aren't just giving kids an activity or asking them to do a movement or a song and kind of shifting from one topic to the next. It is all connected into the same story that you'll be working on throughout the day. So you start off maybe in the morning with telling the first part of the story. You'll go into guided movement time, tell another little part of the story, go into crafts and coloring time, tell another little part of the story, and continue with the activities. They're all connected together, and kids want to do them because it gets them to the next part of the story. There's motivation for it. They're playing pretend. So it's not a worksheet or a hard break from one activity to another. It's all connected into one. There's other early learning skills that are incorporated into the stories. So problem solving, foundational math skills, early literacy practice. A lot of these topics I've seen covered in worksheets. For context, I have a 5-year-old who does not like doing worksheets. If you give him a worksheet in his pre-K class, he goes, no, I don't want to do it. And we'll kind of just color on it, which is fine. But if I give him a worksheet that's connected to the story, he will do the worksheet because he sees that there's some kind of value to it. It's going to progress the story, and he's pretending to be the character and viewing himself as this play role who is completing this mission or this task or this quest. It's not just a worksheet anymore. So a lot of these skills like draw a line to a match, it's called shape matching, will sound out words from the picture sheets. The growing apples one, this one teaches sequences and kind of order of steps. So you'd cut these out and have them place them in order on the table. And then the maze teaches shape and number matching as they get to different points in the maze, and then also making decisions about which path to take. So there's some autonomy skills involved in it as well. The important thing here is that all of these are meaningful to the story, so they become meaningful to the kids who are using them. Overall, when making a tabletop role-playing game for your pre-K class, what it's going to do is build investment and engagement by connecting kids to the story. They're going to be practicing it as this character and in a calm state. So it's easier to internalize. Like I said, if a child is escalated and you're trying to take them and tell them to take a deep breath and practice their techniques, they're probably not going to be able to take that in as well as if they're calm and you act it out with kind of that veil of it being through the perspective of another character. You can cover your existing curriculum. So we took the existing social emotional learning curriculum and all of the learning skills that we wanted to incorporate, and we're able to mesh them into one. Nothing needed to be taken out. It was all just framed as part of the story. You can also connect it to existing interests. So some kids might be into wizards, other kids might be into superheroes. It's pretty easy to pull ideas and pictures and worksheets online. Maybe you want to do one that's a dinosaur that has you counting and adding dinosaurs. Very easy to make a dinosaur adventure, and a lot of kids are going to be involved or interested in that. So you can connect it to their interests and make these activities a lot more engaging for them. It also starts building class collaboration. In my case, they're all working as the same character and making decisions for that character. In other groups and classes, you may have students playing different characters who are all working together. In both cases, everyone is invested in the same goal. So it starts building that foundation for collaborative learning and helping each other out to learn instead of competitive learning for grades and trying to be the best in the class. It builds up more of that team spirit within the group. Before I go into the next spot, are there any questions we want to stop and ask? Just want to double check before I move on. No.
Yeah, so Amy asks, so I can read a book, then we reenact one of the characters in the book?
Yeah, that would be one of the ways to kind of implement a lot of these elements. So the way that I look at this is for pre-K kids, I use a lot as interactive story time. So we're telling a story and then letting them make decisions for the characters as it goes along. So that way they have that contact point and are making that choice for themselves. Having a story where you kind of like act it out afterwards is another great way to incorporate it as well. When I get into the college elements, I did have to go a lot more like story based. So the fun thing about this, or one of the really, let's say, beneficial things about tabletop RPGs is you can kind of sliding scale which elements you want to incorporate. So if you've got a book that you really want to focus on, taking themes from that book or even the exact story from that book and translating it over is a really good option.
So do you frame this to the kids as the beginning, or as beginning an adventure or story time or something else? I want to do this with my kids, just not sure what to label it as.
So there's a couple ways to introduce it with my kid. I have told him, hey, we're going to tell a story together. And that was enough for him. For a class, maybe it's we're going to have an activity together and we're going to learn about Sandy the Dragon. Would you like to help me tell the story? And that's the way that I framed it for young children, is we're going to be telling a story together, because that's essentially what it is. And that seemed to work pretty well. They understand what stories are, and then saying that we're going to tell it together is kind of like, oh, what's that? How is that different? Because you're not just reading to them, they're participating as well.
All right, those are the questions. So.
Okay, awesome. I just want to make sure I wasn't like getting too far ahead of myself here. So we've talked about the pre-K overall, and the slide transition is a fun one. So now we're going to go into adult education. All the text stays the same. So when we're looking at adult education, we're still going to be building investment and engagement. We're going to be having students practice and make it easier to internalize than if they were experiencing it firsthand. We're going to still cover the existing curriculum. We're going to connect it to their interests, and it's going to foster class collaboration. The focus of this particular example that I'm going to go through is for an engineering class, because that's what I'm familiar with and teaching and have the most experience with. But you can apply it to a lot of other classes as well, whether you're looking at a high school class, college class, or adult education beyond college. So for my engineering class, this was created for a freshman engineering introductory course. It was very project-based. So I had the advantage of the class assignments being broken up into interactive projects the students were doing. The goal for this was that the tabletop RPG elements needed to take less than 5 minutes per week to implement, because we were already pretty crunched on class time. It needed to increase student engagement, provide examples for lecture-only topics, and also teach career skills that were previously not covered or were only mentioned in the existing lesson. As a heads up, it's tabletop role-playing game. For the game elements, I wasn't able to get them approved for the first go at this, but next semester, I do plan on introducing some game elements where maybe if the entire class does the assignment, they get a bonus to a roll to see if our character succeeds in their career opportunity or not. So we will be incorporating that a little bit more in the future. Just for heads up right now, I wasn't able to get it approved for the first trial. So for student engagement, similar to the pre-K example where the entire class was playing as the same fictional character, we do that with the college class as well. We create one fictional engineering character for the whole class. This is used as a focal point for all of our stories, but then it's also a team building activity on the first day of class. I took the existing icebreaker, which was about kind of focusing on telling each other their names and interests, to putting the class into groups where they needed to talk about something that they all had in common with each other. And then we would put that as characteristics for our class engineer. So it got everyone seeing what similarities they had, and then having a little bit of themselves put into this class engineer as part of the character creation. The last semester, our class engineer, they liked Indian food, they played hockey, they played video games, they did not have a car, they lived on campus, and they were going for a degree in engineering. And between all of those elements, all of the students in the class have a little bit of that representation in our class engineer. From there, each assignment for the class has some kind of story that's associated with it. It's maybe about a paragraph long, and it frames the assignment in the context of the career path of this class engineer. So they're going to be going through maybe an internship, a co-op, their first job out of college, and so on. And so we're going to follow that as we go through the assignments. So the class is experiencing it through the eyes of this engineer and seeing the value to the assignments. We also have a class recap. So we talk about what did the engineer learn. So we're looking at their perspective. We want to see, we're not asking the students what did they learn. We're asking what did our class engineer learn? And this is important because when we ask the student what they learned, they're maybe going to say, oh, well, I learned about building bridges, or I learned how to write a paper. If we ask what the engineer learned, they're going to say, well, the engineer had to make a proposal. The engineer learned what it was like to do an internship. It kind of gives a little bit of that separation, and it's sometimes easier to say what somebody else has learned, or it gets them thinking about it a little more instead of just the surface response. They have to take that extra step already to put themselves into the perspective of the engineer. So it takes an extra, maybe like 3 seconds to get into that mindset. And by then they've gone past like that initial like generic response and are kind of thinking about what actually has the engineer learned. So it gets them looking at that introspective element a little bit more. For giving the story meaning, one of the examples of the kind of story that we may introduce is we will take a common middle school or high school project, like building a bridge out of straws and tape, and we upscale it to fit a college level course. So we have that they need to build a bridge using the least materials possible, and they need to write a report about it. The upscale part is that they need to write an engineering report where they have done research about bridge structures and they're following the paper format for an engineering report submission. As an educator, I can see how this has benefits to hands-on practice and developing skills for writing reports in their career later in life. But from a student perspective, they're looking at, okay, I got to build this bridge and I need to write a report to get a good grade. When we add the frame of the story, we say that we need to build a bridge for a community in need. So that shows how something like this may be applicable to the real world. We want to use the least materials possible due to the community's limited resources. So we emphasize that engineers often have to deal with low materials and consider cost. And then the report is needed to be evaluated by a city planning committee. So this gives an example of why you need to write a report as an engineer, and then also gives meaning to the report. So they're not just looking at, oh, I need to write a report to show my engineering knowledge. No, it's you need to write a report to show your engineering knowledge to a city planner in order to get your project approved. And we will talk about that. These bullet points are like kind of the main topics. It'll be written up into like a short paragraph that takes a couple minutes to read. We'll read it in class. Either I'll read it or I'll call on a student to read it. And this helps to give a really good frame for why we're doing the assignment and what we can learn from it. I'd also talked about how we wanted to give examples of career skills that were not previously demonstrated or practiced in the assignments, and that were part of the lecture only section of the course. So these orange highlighted ones on the side, these topics, networking, internships, and keeping a portfolio. These were topics that were covered in the class already, but only as a lecture or maybe as a kind of comment on some of the assignments. The ones in black, career shifts, first job applications, studying abroad, and nonprofit organizations, are some of the examples of topics that were not covered in the class that I wanted to make sure were included, because I feel like they're important for engineers to be able to understand how to shift your career, apply for your first job, and so on. So an example of how we incorporated this, in the previous version of the class, we had a section about networking, and the basic gist of it was that networking is the process for making career relationships, and that it's important for engineers. There was a lecture on it, and usually about 5 minutes in, students are kind of like, okay, pretty ready to move on to the next topic. And we've just kind of talked about it in the class. But now, within the frame of the story that we put on each of our assignments, on one of them, I'll put, after deciding to quit the job related to assignment 7 due to the work environment being too hectic, which that project was intended to maybe be a little chaotic, our engineer calls up their manager, Ray, from the internship they were in during assignment 2 to see if they have any openings, and success. There aren't any openings at Ray's company, but they know someone who is looking for an engineer. So this only takes maybe like 20 seconds to read. But now our students who have been following this engineer's path over the past maybe 8-9 weeks have a very clear example of what networking is. And also that maybe when you use networking, it doesn't result in the exact outcome that you were hoping for, but it can still have a different beneficial outcome. They didn't get a job at Ray's company, but they have an opportunity that's opened up elsewhere. It gives a lot better description of networking by example. Instead of just saying you make career relationships and it's important, you've now demonstrated you're making career relationships, so that way you can get a job when you want to shift careers or when you're looking for a new opportunity, and you enter somebody else's network and they can make recommendations for who else to contact. There's also other examples of how to incorporate tabletop RPGs into your class. So with the college engineering course, I was doing it very story-based and having students make decisions about the career path of this engineer. In other classes, I've heard of teachers using it to teach history. So one teacher from a group called 225 Games taught Beowulf using Dungeons and Dragons in his class. So for 1 week, his history class had students in groups of about 5, each controlling one character, and going through a narrative that had them interacting with the characters from Beowulf. He said that previously, when he would cover Beowulf, after the test or the evaluation period, students would forget the names of all the characters. It wasn't clicking quite so much. Maybe like a year later, they wouldn't remember much of the story. But then once they played in the game and were immersed in that world and interacting with the characters and asking questions, all of the students remember the names afterwards. He would catch up with them and they'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that class. That was so cool. We like talked to Beowulf and his brother and like we did this and this and this. And we're excited about having learned it. Another good resource is, or another good example is Luck of Legends This is Michael Lowe, uses online tabletop RPGs to teach literacy. He's had kids come into his tabletop RPG sessions who are struggling to read and write. And through the tabletop RPGs, these struggling students, a couple months later, are so engrossed in the narrative of their character that even outside of the assignments for the class or the writing work, they are writing these like 20, 30-page stories about their character. Total flip from saying, I can't write, or I don't like writing, to being passionate about writing for their character. Another good example is there's a adventure called The God Corpse. This one's intended for high schoolers. And it is to teach high school anatomy. The premise is that there is this titanic body of a god that is floating up above this world. And so your characters are explorers that are going to try and find out what's going on with it. So it's a little bit of kind of like an Osmosis Jones situation. You are exploring into this body. You maybe get attacked by white blood cells or like their analog in the story. And you're seeing how everything is connected to get from one organ to the next. And so it gives kids, or it gives students, a very interactive way to engage with the material, and it makes it fun. They're going to remember having each other's back while fighting off these white blood cells that are coming after them for a while to come. Like, it's not going to just disappear when they take the test. They're going to remember that experience. And then I had mentioned before, Arithmagine is a really good one for teaching math. It's a simple mechanic that you can incorporate into either using it as like a card game in your class, as something fun, or as part of a storytelling mechanic. This one teaches multiplication. I had talked about, you can use it you can tweak it to use exponents and other methods of, or other aspects of mathematics. And it's really easy to incorporate into a math class as kind of a short, maybe here we're going to talk about the story for 10 minutes at the end of class, and kind of slide it in without interrupting your lesson plans. From developing a problem-solving mindset, tabletop RPGs are also really good for this. Even weekly for fun games that aren't part of a class setting or intended to be educational can be very educational and build up these foundational skills that, especially like I said, I'm an engineer and an engineering professor, so anything having to do with the problem-solving process is kind of my shtick. And tabletop RPGs do an excellent job of helping players to practice this over and over. So what we have here is the engineering design process. And when you're in a tabletop RPG, let's say you have a quest. You're going to ask what the problem is. So in this scenario, we're going to say the world is about to end. There is a giant meteor that is coming to hit the Earth, and your party needs to find this magic staff that can destroy the meteor. This magic staff, however, is guarded by a giant dragon. So this party is going to go ask about what is up with this dragon, where is it? They're going to try and find it. They're going to do that research for the problem. And then once they've got that information, they're going to try and think about different options for getting to that staff. Are they going to try and sneak in to steal the staff from the dragon? Are they going to try and fight the dragon? Are they going to try and put the dragon to sleep? Are they going to try and use some kind of spell to draw the dragon out and create a distraction? Or are they going to try and bargain with the dragon? They're going to think up a whole bunch of different opportunities or options that they can use for this. After debating it and narrowing down their possibilities, then they're going to test it out. So they're going to see how well their plan works by enacting it and trying to get into this dragon's lair. And sometimes it doesn't always go as planned. You get a bad roll, or the plan wasn't robust enough, or maybe they didn't do enough research in the beginning. But oftentimes your party will find a way to escape and try again another day. They're going to improve their plan and come back again. Maybe this time they recruit a cleric who can help with healing, or maybe some defensive spells. So that way they've got a better chance of going at it next time. And then they're going to iterate this process and maybe ask, is this the best option? Is there some other way we can stop the meteor? And so on. So every single session, they are cycling through this process until it becomes natural. And it's like second nature. Teaching engineering freshmen, a lot of them come into college after having come through high school and being in a very, I will say, rigid academic environment where it's learn this material from the book. Maybe we do some lab experiments, but we are going to have like set questions for it that you're going to be answering. And it's very linear in the approach. This gets students thinking more organically and more creatively and practicing those skills. So when you get into a career like engineering, or really any career or any element of life outside of school, you have this problem-solving process that you've been practicing potentially for years before you get into that environment. So you have that resilient mentality when you go in. And then for this part right here, I want to give a shout out to Marianne Cullinan, because whenever I've done a talk with her, she's mentioned affinity spaces, and this is a really key part of tabletop RPGs. And these are pictures from Inspirials that I think really demonstrate how tabletop RPGs can build up teams and friend groups. Aside from all of the learning elements that we can maybe measure on paper, there's also the element of learning social skills and building a friend group and having that experience be a shared collaboration between everyone involved. In the fiction, you're going to be having each other's backs, you're going to be working together, and you're going to be doing some, frankly, like awesome stuff with your characters. While that's in the fiction, you are still going to feel it in real life. If your friend next to you has pulled you up off the ground and healed you up at a dire moment, you're going to remember that and feel that gratitude, not just like in character, but with that person. So it builds that relationship. And we all know how important it is to have friendships in life and to have people that understand us and that we can go to for help or just to have fun. And this gives a really good foundation for it. So if you're looking to start a group, it can have a tremendous impact on kind of the social and friend group side as well. And one of the key things about tabletop RPGs that are used in an educational sense is that it can be flexible to what you need for your class or your group. I've demonstrated the pre-K example. The entire class was based around the tabletop RPG. In the college example, it was limited to 5 minutes per session, and I had to do what I could with that 5 minutes. And then in some of the other examples that I've given, it's ranged from either being a whole focus class, something incorporated into a school curriculum, something in an after-school program, etc. So you can adjust it as you want. It doesn't have to be a full designated game. If you can incorporate the elements and they help, then that's good. You also want to focus on reframing your curriculum instead of rewriting it. If you have certain goals that you want to achieve, see how tabletop RPGs can help with that and meeting the existing goals, instead of trying to kind of rewrite everything or start from scratch. And then use what your setting allows. Like I said, with the college course, I didn't have any randomization mechanics during the first couple semesters. But for future, I do want to incorporate them and have a plan for it. I'm able to add those and propose that after I've gotten data on the first trial to show that there was an improvement in the class and in their understanding of the topics that we were covering. So you can kind of progress it, but do what you're able to and see where that goes and grow it later if you need to. And then for additional resources, and I will drop the link in the chat again. On TTRPGkids, I have a whole section that's devoted to educational tabletop RPGs. And then I also have reviews of a couple books. There's the Teacher Gamer Handbook for anyone who wants to make a TTRPG based class. And then Let's Roll is written by a librarian for running a successful fantasy role-playing program in your school or public library. So the review for that just came out today. I was able to time it with the talk. And it's a really good resource. Both of these are for starting up your groups. There's also Luck of Legends I mentioned a couple of times, and Marianne Cullinan. There's interviews with both of them on the TTRPGkids site. And that link that I dropped has links to everything that's shown here, and then also to any of the games that I've mentioned. And then if you want to support TTRPGkids, the best way to do that is to use and share the resource. So I spent a lot of time making this. Please use it, and I hope it helps. And then I do have additional talks that I'm giving. So feel free to hit me up if you have questions about things after this as well. But for right now, thank you for joining in. And I believe we have time for questions. We got about 15 minutes, it looks like.
Yeah, this was great. So
Awesome.
I will read you the first question, and I'll keep trying to note these down. Do you find it easier to write your own curriculum or start with a TTRPG or game system already created?
So I am a homebrew GM by nature. So for me personally, I like to write my own. And I like the flexibility of being able to adjust it to my specific classes and the situations that I've seen. However, it totally depends on the person. Let me scroll up a little bit. So with this right here, the Beowulf example and the Guy Corpse one, those are both like D&D and Pathfinder based. Whereas like Luck of Legends is he uses his own system. I made my own system, that Story Guider one, for the pre-K class. And then for the college course, I sort of freeformed it again and was able incorporated the TTRPG elements that I felt I was able to within the limits that I was given. So,
all right. How do you incorporate the game elements into your pre-K curriculum?
So for the pre-K curriculum, that one, it's mostly based on the choice elements. So students have a choice in what the character does. So it's very kind of interactive story time based. And then for the game elements, instead of having dice rolls, because not all of the kids can, like some of them are still working on like numbers and addition and things like that. I will have the worksheets be kind of the mechanic for moving on to the next step or seeing if it succeeds. So if they find all the potion ingredients, then that's available for the next section. If they don't find all the potion ingredients, so they don't do the worksheet, then the only thing that they have available is the stinky cheese to add to the potion. So they don't have like the magical flower and the mushroom and the berries. They just get stinky cheese. So there's different ways to incorporate mechanics. There's also with the pre-K example, I have some really big, giant, chunky foam dice that I have used with my kid as well. Where we have a really simple, if it's a 3 or above, it succeeds. And if it's a 1 or a 2, it doesn't, we need to try something else. So then if let's say we want to use the shout, I can do it, but Sandy rolls a 1, then we can try again with the other option. So with really young kids, we don't want to say like, you failed, especially when we're practicing social emotional learning skills. So sometimes the first one doesn't work out. Maybe we roll and see that we need that extra little bit of motivation. So we try the other one instead. So you still have different paths that it forms throughout the story. There is some randomization, some practice using numbers, but it's not as rigid as other systems, just because it is modeled or being used with very young children.
Great. Do you see a difference between serious games, games that teach, and the gamification of the curriculum, or the introducing game elements into the curriculum?
Yep. So when we say like a serious game, are you saying like maybe like Dungeons and Dragons, or like a regimented system?
I think more like games that were designed for the purposes of teaching. So,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
Oregon Trail might be the most classic example of it, although that's a fun game in and of itself. But
yeah. So just because something is geared at teaching doesn't mean that it can't be fun. One of my favorite games for demonstrating this is Inspirals. So you are constantly practicing sign language and your spell casting, and it is fluidly incorporated into the game to where it doesn't feel like a learning game. It feels like a game that happens to have you practice sign language. With Arithmagin and with Wither and Wentz, these are kind of similar. The mechanic here is just, that is the mechanic that you use in order to resolve parts of the story. Students who are practicing like multiplication and exponents, I think, are going to know that it is a math game and that it is intended to get them to practice math. However, it is just another element of the game. So it doesn't have to be like, this is a game for math and we want it to be serious. This is a game and we have mechanics that help us to practice math. With Wither and Wentz, using the non-standard units of measurement, this one, my kid, he was 4 when we played it. I didn't tell him it was a math game. It was just, we were going to play a game. And he actually wanted to play this like 5 or 6 times in a row because he got so into it and was lining the blocks up and counting them and saying like, oh no, I need 2 more blocks to get over to there, and was judging the distance without even like trying after a while because he had just gotten really used to the mechanics. So it can be, it doesn't have to be overtly a teaching game. Like it can just have teaching elements incorporated into it. And you can do that with the setting too, like with God Corpse, you're exploring inside the body. So obviously there is that educational element to it. However, it is still playing the game. It just happens to be that the setting is something that you can interact with and also helps with teaching.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more about TTRPGs for larger groups, like 20 or more students in a class?
Yeah. So both the pre-K class and the college class were for a group of 20 or more students. And then also, sorry, I know I'm flipping slides. I hope I'm not giving anyone a headache. For like this Beowulf one, it was also for a class of 20 students. So there's a few ways to handle the larger crowds. One is having them all play the same character, and there's like one character for the class. That's the method that I prefer. With the Beowulf example, he broke it up into groups of 4 or 5, and then had that group of 4 or 5 play one character. And so then there were maybe like, let's say 5 groups of 5. So 25 students, and then you had 5 characters who were in this adventuring party and playing out the story. So that can be another way to make it manageable. A third way that I've heard people using is to have like student run modular groups. So maybe you have a student who is kind of operating things for that table. And then the other 4 at the table are kind of playing the game. And so then you've got like 5 tables set up in that configuration. And then another method that we've used so earlier this year, I was at South by Southwest with a group that included Michael and Marianne, and then an individual named Chris Hopper. And we ran a workshop for, oh gosh, I think it was like 40-ish participants, where they were all playing the same game. So at each table, you had like 5, 6, 7 characters who were all playing within that realm, and they would kind of like earn points and progress within that table. And we would go around and ask them questions to make sure that they understood the learning material. They had to go into a cell and fight off a virus. And so we would go around as the teacher to check on their work essentially and make sure that they actually read the prompts and were understanding what mitochondria was, what the function of the cell wall was, and things like that before they could progress to the next stage. And so we had each of these tables coming up with the solution for all of their characters to this prompt. We would go around and check this table, this table, this table, and make sure that they were all understanding it and playing the game simultaneously with us kind of supervising and going through. They did a lot of self-teaching with that method because maybe one person in the group understood what the situation was with the mitochondria. And so then in order for the whole table to like progress to the next step, they had to explain it to everybody. And so they were teaching each other. And that's another really good way to do it. That has everyone progressing and learning without having to micromanage all of the students who are playing the game.
Great. These next 2 are somewhat similar, so I'm going to go ahead and combine them since we're getting close on time. The first part was advice for groups that are infrequent, so a story time or some other activity where you don't necessarily know who's going to come week to week. And then the second person asked about advice for managing a group where some members may have more experience than others. So I think they're probably getting at like sort of the alpha gamer problem.
Yeah. So for infrequent attendees, having it as like a one-shot or drop-in structure works really well. There is a game called Adventures on a Single Page that is intended for a 50-minute after-school program. And it is designed for students to kind of come in, participate in the game, and whoever shows up for the day can play it. That's kind of the same situation with the Story Guider one. Because everyone's playing the same character, whoever's in the class is going to be participating. And if you don't have like everyone coming on a consistent schedule, you still have your same character that's going through everything and the group's making the decision. Doing it as kind of like one-shot structures, where you have like if you wanted to do a whole campaign setting with a connected story and having multiple characters or like a character for each player, you'd want to probably have it a little bit more flexible with the story and have more modular stories. So that way, you can cover in this 2-hour session, start to end this mini arc. And then next week, start to end this next mini arc, and whoever shows up can participate. For the second question, can you repeat that one more time?
So a group where you may have some that are more experienced. And
yes.
I'm thinking they might be getting at dealing with alpha gamers and one person taking over.
Yeah. So if you have kind of one person taking over, or somebody is getting more of the spotlight than the others, having them buddy up with somebody is one strategy I've heard people use, where like someone's success is maybe dependent on the other person also succeeding. Building stories that are specifically for the other individuals can help. One thing that I really liked in the talk that I had with, it was Garrett from 225 Games about the Beowulf one, is he had a method for having like a spotlight card that went between the tables. So you could hold your card up and interrupt or like have some input, maybe like once or twice in the game. But then once that was done, that was kind of your shot. So you would save that to make sure that you had something really important to say. And just because he was managing like a fairly large group of middle schoolers, and some of them had been playing Dungeons and Dragons and were getting pretty involved with it, he needed something to sort of moderate that a little bit more. So that's another method that you could use. Spotlight cards are really good. And having like a good session 0 where you cover the ground rules of we're going to take turns with people and make sure that everyone gets their say and so on, is also really helpful with that.
All right. At this point, we're getting lots of thank yous and some interaction between participants in the chat, which is great.
Yeah.
We did get one which you may have answered, but I'll go ahead and read it out if you want to add anything to that. It's how do I incorporate this into story times with my young children at the library?
Yep.
Which I think you talked about, but go ahead.
Yeah. That was my intention with Story Guider. So I originally made that system to be interactive story time, where we would get to a point in the story with my kid, and then I would ask, what should the character do? And he liked it so much that I made it into this little mini system. And then that's where this my pre-K teacher librarian friend found out about it and was like, oh, we should write a curriculum. So interactive story time is a really good method for like introducing this, and it gets kids used to making those choices. A lot of times what I'll do with my kid is we're reading a book now, and he's like, well, I think the character should do this instead. He can't read yet, but we have pictures, and so we might change the description for the picture based on the choice he wanted. That's okay. He's having that interaction and he's involved with the story and invested in it. So that's all right for kids to describe that, or maybe asking, what do you think's going on in this picture instead of reading it? That could be another way to use an existing book, but still have that choice available for your readers and your kids.
All right. We did have someone ask about modifying this into a one-shot for data literacy and other sort of academic focus. So if you want to speak on that, I'll let you, but I did drop a link. August, what is the date? Hold on just a second, folks. August 9th at 10 a.m. we'll have another webinar. What the research says. I'll drop this class if you are the spy, teaching information literacy with tabletop games. So while that's not specifically data literacy, it may be also of interest to those of you here. But yeah, if you want to add anything to that while I keep looking through the chat. Yeah.
There is one game, I haven't played it yet, but I've heard that it is, it's called Encode. And I heard that it kind of gets into teaching a little bit of this. My partner is a computer engineer, and he has gone into like how he thinks that we can make a tabletop RPG that teaches programming and whatnot. Finding a way to take the thing that you want to teach and making it into a mechanic or a story for the game. It may sound kind of difficult at first, but I would recommend to just try it out. Think of, if I want to teach, you said it was like data literacy.
Yeah.
So would this be like kind of data analysis? Okay. So I'm thinking, so like I did a lot of data analysis when I was doing crash test engineering. We would have sheets and sheets and sheets of crash test dummy data. And if you want to look at, we want to graph this data, understand what it means, and so on, and turn that into a game. Having a data sheet and then asking students, oh, we need to graph this data so that way, I'm trying to think of a story. We need to graph this data in order to stop the superhero villain from setting off a device that is going to melt all the ice cream on the planet. We need to, or this graph is the radio frequency that he's using to send out this transmission. We need to intercept it, and we're going to use this data to do our kind of like mumbo jumbo in the background and beat the bad guy. So maybe you're playing like in a superhero game or something. So that could be one way to frame the story. And then the success of graphing and having it match up to the radio frequency that you're trying to look at could determine if you get to the next step or if you've got to do something else. So that can be kind of like your mechanic split and the story that you're interacting with. Hopefully that answered the question.
Sounded good to me. So I have dropped in the chat the link for the LEU request form. If any of you need that, please be sure to fill it out. Most of the rest of this are thanks and fantastics. Several people talking about trying to catch you either at Gen Con or PAX Unplugged. So that's great to hear. One last question. Someone did ask, is Pokemon cards considered a TTRPG? And I'm thinking that's more of a collectible card game or a living card game. Maybe not a TTRPG, but.
Yeah. I think that it probably, as it is, it falls into kind of like the trading card game, collectible card game.
Yeah.
But I think you could definitely turn it into a TTRPG.
Oh, absolutely.
If you've got people playing as like different types of characters and you have value numbers on the card that you can use, that's, I can't see why I couldn't turn it into a tabletop RPG. I took some of the mechanics actually from Pokemon cards and made one that was about rocks that gave you superpowers. So you can definitely like take existing games and tweak them to do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, just the cards themselves, you're not really building the story. So I'm sure that's why it doesn't, as its own game, fall into TTRPGs. But absolutely, you can build around just about anything. I mean, I believe Root was a board game first, and now it's a role-playing game. And yeah, there's lots of examples of that. Okay. Yeah, they just trade with each other. So yeah. Yeah, TCGs could be used in the classroom by having each kid be a Pokemon trainer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we are over 11, so I totally understand if people need to leave. But if anyone has more questions, I can certainly stick around. I don't want to keep Steph too long, but feel free to add any other questions in the chat, and we can try to get to them now. And if not, I will get them to her after, and we can get answers to you. With the presentation, the recording, the slides, all that stuff will be coming out hopefully within a week or two. And thank you all for being here. Lots more wonderful presentations, a lot of more thank yous.
And thank you for having me. So,
oh, sure, this was great.
I always love talking about this, so it's always fun, and I hope it helps. So.